What categories to avoid selling on Amazon? I asked this question to many of the top sellers, and boy do I got the answer for you. By the end of this video, you will find out which product categories that you should avoid and why. My name is Samuel, and as always, I'm your host. Let's get started. Are there any products you don't recommend people to sell?
I would say electronics, stay away from electronics. They are very complicated in many senses. High return, one product that is being broken, it's costly, it's capital intense. So definitely stay away from electronics and also apparel, any clothes.
Oh, a lot of return rates, yeah.
Yes. The people think that they're medium, but they're large and they still want to be medium. So yeah, it's a complicated category as well.
Avoid any categories with high IP complaints, because that's probably the things that are going to hurt you most. As a seasoned seller with a lot of transactions, you can get away with a IP complaint here and there, but if you're brand new with an account health rating of 200, getting hit by one IP complaint is pretty tough. So I would avoid things like beauty, generally pretty high in that type of risk.
We get this data primarily from Keepa, but small brands where there's historically been one seller, those will be intellectual property complaint magnet, an IP magnet, because that's generally a private label brand that polices their branding very ferociously. So you really need to know Keepa and click down and look at the bottom chart and the number of offers. And if it's only had one offer for a long time, I would avoid that.
What items that you just don't sell?
Again, my experience is deep in shoes and clothes. So smaller sizes, take shoes. There's a huge overlap between the large youth shoe sizes and the small adult sizes. And someone that, say, a man that has a size 5 foot, he's going to typically know he can go to the youth department and buy the same
something
style,
cheaper, right?
Much cheaper. Yeah.
Okay.
And then for whatever reasons, women's athletic apparel in extra small, it has no margin. We don't buy it.
I think it depends on your risk tolerance. So I would say probably supplements is kind of a very risky one, just because I've seen a lot of them get shut down, or people, because they have, I don't know, Amazon's obviously, they don't want anything to hurt the customer. So some of this stuff like, improve your memory or brain function stuff, like that stuff you get yanked, or there's an ingredient in there that's no longer like FDA approved. Some of these companies are usually, they're not sold in big chains, so they're kind of like private label in a sense. And they don't like sellers coming on the listing because they'll jack up the price compared to their website. I think anything that's really expensive, like high-end designer, because there's lots of counterfeits out there. So that's like a really good red flag. People complain about it. You don't want to be like selling counterfeits for sure. So I think like supplements, really high-end stuff, especially if you're starting out, you don't want to be spending a ton of capital on higher end items, especially if like they go down or you get a return, it could really turn negative.
Yeah, if it become return, it's really hard to use it so that it's used. You probably have to sell it on other platforms.
Yeah, I was talking to someone the other day and they were selling Hoka shoes. They were paying, I don't know, like $150 for them, trying to sell them for like $250. But like if you only have a certain budget, like spending $10, buying 10, that's $1,500. And then if you 2 pairs get returned, like you're wiped out, like regardless on ROI. So you just want to know where you're at. So stay away from expensive items, supplements, or like anything, maybe even beauty if your account's not seasoned. So anything like people like put on their face or consume, like could be dicey.
I buy a bit of shoes. For people selling shoes, I can speak to that. I'm sure there are other category or product that people will say, to avoid, but let me just talk about shoes. When you're selling shoes, oftentimes I also, again, diversify, sell different kind of shoes, but with an emphasis on Nike shoes and athletic shoes, because the return tend to be lower. However, you avoid like a high-end dress shoes, especially women dress shoes, because I've seen the incident. It tend to people buy from Amazon, and after the event wearing those shoes, they would just return it, right? But if you have a strategy in place, you can actually help you. You can go into that kind of buying that kind of shoes. For example, if you're doing FBM, you're in more control of the shoes you're selling. So what happened is, for the high-end shoes, dress shoes, you can either, for every FBM order, you can actually take picture of your FBM order, 6 photos of the same shoes with the UPC and everything. You document it in case people, they return a worn shoes, either dirty or whatever, and you can file a safety claim to Amazon and you get your refund. If you're doing FBA, it simply said it's a customer damage. You won't be able to get your refund on that.
Number one, if they don't fit the criteria that we talked about, like those 3 points, you need to discard those products right away. If there is like any specific type of product that usually I try to avoid, I would say electronics, because the return rate is super, super high. So even if you're selling, I don't know, laptops or monitors or TVs, whatever, and you're making like really good money on the actual sale, you need to take into consideration the return rate and how that's affecting your business.
This might be controversial, but I personally don't like electronics that much, simply because there's a lot of breakage and a lot of theft. In other words, people purchase their higher priced items usually in the electronics category. People purchase them, they will take a component out and then return it, so it becomes damaged and you can't use it, or it breaks easily during transport, or they just purchase the new one and they send the old one back. So there's a lot of money to be made in electronics, but there is the risk of that loss is higher, so I personally don't like electronics.
100% want to avoid stuff that the brand is on the listing. So the stuff where it's obviously their real estate, their internet real estate, and they're going to kick you off the listing and potentially get your account suspended if you're on that listing. So just check the buy box. If the brand's on the listing, just stay off that listing, and you 100% want to avoid that. And then also stuff that's not profitable. Like, why send stuff in if you're not actually profitable, or if it's a super, super small ROI? Like, just try to find some competitive advantage and run that.
For new sellers to avoid, I typically recommend avoiding clothing and shoes. As much as there are sellers that do $10 to $20 million a year on clothing and shoes, there's a high return rate, and there's a lot of, more of the consistent looking for good deals at outlet stores. I think new sellers need to focus on things that have a low return rate so that their cash flow can be more easily managed. They can learn the Amazon platform through replenishable arbitrage products, whether it's grocery products or arts and crafts, office supplies, etc. Those are the places that new sellers should be, and avoid the things with high return rates or things that are even difficult. So I would probably avoid glass products too and stuff
Breakable
like that.
products
Yeah, breakable
like that.
products, exactly.
I would avoid fragile products, so like glassware. There's going to be a high probability that it's broken or chipped or whatever by the time it gets to a customer, and then you're losing out on that. Probably just like really large, like oversized products. Those can cut into your margins more than you might think, and then also they're typically higher average sale price. And so if you don't really know what you're doing, and maybe, the product, even if you know what you're doing, people could return those and then they could be unsellable. And then that can also really cut into your margins.
I wouldn't say stay away from shoes and clothing, but I would go in shoes and clothing thinking there's gonna be a high return rate. So you don't wanna go after 20% return on investment products, because that 20% return on investment is probably actually 0%, because after you get a 15 to 30% return rate, or even 40%, those items aren't gonna be profitable anymore. So I'd just be very careful. That's a high return category. I would just watch out for the high return categories, and also watch out for like categories that have a lot of IP complaints. Textbooks are one of those, just be careful, ask around. If it's like a brand new brand or category that nobody's selling, ask your good closest selling friends if they've ever heard of somebody selling this before, and just be ready. And look out for categories that don't have many sellers on it. Like if there's only 1 or 2, it might be private label, or maybe there's just heavy IP complaints in that category. So, but just off the top of my head, like clothing and shoes, I know people making a ton of money with those, but I also know a lot of people that go in those business models and they think they're making money. They're doing like 6,000 in sales, but when they run their P&L report, it's like too many returns. They didn't make anything.
And that's all the time that we have for today. Did you learn which products and categories to avoid selling on Amazon? That's awesome. This way you're really gonna source products that are profitable and you're gonna make more money. And as we wait for the next episode, remember BQool has the best AI repricer on the market, and we have a 14-day free trial. No credit card is needed. Only pay when you get results. This way you're constantly winning the buy box. I'll see you next time.